On tonight's edition of the CHGO Cubs-related podcast, the World Series is almost over. It means the offseason begins in earnest. We'll set the Cubs up for the 2026 offseason and take a look at how close they were to being a World Series contender in 2025 on tonight's edition of the CHGO Cubs-related podcast. This is the CHGO Cubs-related podcast presented by Toyota. Let's go places. Good evening, everybody. My name is Corey, joined as always by Brendan. We are coming to you on Thursday. It is October 30th. Brendan, the World Series can be over as early as Friday night, which means, bang, Jed Hoyer gets to work.
I was counting down the weeks until the first spring training game. Honestly, once the World Series ends, you got the GM meetings in 3 weeks. You got the winter meetings a month thereafter. January turns around. The guys start reporting. In my mind, baseball season's almost here, Corey.
Yes, it is about that time. On tonight's episode, I think last week you and I discussed, like, there's going to be a ton of time in this offseason where we dive into a lot of these specific players. Last year, you and I think, had 3 or 4 episodes talking about an Alex Bregman deal that never actually materialized. We did talk about Kyle Tucker, too, preemptively, and that one ended up happening. So we were nice and prepared for that. So there will be a ton of time for, like, these specifics, like this is who they're targeting. What does it mean? What does it look like? Brendan breaking down these different pitchers. And throughout the week, Luke, Joey, and the guys are doing report cards on the 2025 Chicago Cubs, breaking down each of the individual players. So I think for this week, kind of continuing the exercise of, like, looking back at 2025, but squaring it with how do the Cubs get better? How do they get further? How do they win a title and keep advancing, right? And so I think one of the key questions that we wanted to look at was the Cubs ended up in the final 5, Brendan. By default, the American League, championship series was set before
I like the final
the National
5
League.
sure.
But, like, technically in the final 5, they were one of the last 5 teams playing.
That's right.
And so I've seen this question kind of a lot, like, by default, they're World Series contenders. They're playing when most of the league is not. They're a win away from playing for the pennant, yada, yada, yada. 4 wins, 5 wins away from playing in the World Series, whatever math you want to do. But I don't know if you and I have really dove into this. Like, one, they obviously don't beat the Brewers. They don't survive that first round. And could they have won another series, a 7-game series against the Dodgers, and then, let's say it's in that timeline, still the Blue Jays, could they have won all of these games, right? Were there 9 more wins in this team against that competition? And kind of taking that question and squaring it with, okay, you plan to lose some of these bullpen guys. You plan probably to lose Kyle Tucker. How do you, if the answer is no, that they were not really a World Series contender, despite being quite close, how do you get there?
Look at the Blue Jays, how they're winning these games. And you can look at the Dodgers, how they won their games last year. You think the Blue Jays were planning on having Savage do what he's doing? He wasn't even pitching on the opening day roster, let alone the August roster. He made his MLB debut 6 weeks ago. You think they were planning for Bieber to be traded coming off Tommy John surgery and making significant starts? What about Scherzer lasting this deep, the uncertainty with the age? All of that wasn't set in stone. When we go through these off-season plans, we talk about setting the roster in stone. What I've learned, though, watching the Blue Jays and watching the Dodgers, And it's not shocking. It's not something that's like transformative. But what I've really emphasized in my own mind is how significant it is to lock up guys at the top end of the offensive scale. So Vladdy, George Springer, although that was a little bit of a surprise. And then for the Dodgers case, of course, Shohei and Freddie Freeman. And you've seen each one of those players more or less win a game. And for the Cubs case, they had a little bit of a glimpse with that with Michael Busch. But going into the year, it was Tucker and the injuries faded them, but it wasn't enough. Whereas you look at the Dodgers, you look at the Blue Jays, they have consolidated offensive performances from the top end of the lineup. And the back end, honestly, it's not as good as the Cubs, but it's that top end where you get those like single games and they're carrying the teams. When I start thinking about the offseason plans and how this Cubs team goes forward, it's more emphasis for me like, hey, you got to find those guys or develop your current guys to match those top end guys that we're currently seeing.
Yeah, and I'm surprised we've made it this long. I feel like the natural answer, if anyone listening has listened to Brendan and I for a period of time, I sort of expected the answer from Brendan to be, well, I told them to sign Kevin Gausman 6 years ago.
You brought it up. I didn't bring it up.
And
you brought it up because every time I bring it up, you scream at me.
Yeah, taking the mound in Toronto with a chance to win the World Series.
But you know what I mean, though? It's like, I know we always talk about star power and everything, and that is true. And the Cubs did have their quote unquote star in Tucker, and he faded, make no doubt about that. Yeah. But ultimately, like, he still produced. Tucker still produced in the offseason. He was well above average production, but it wasn't that like upper echelon, right? So if Tucker does go away from this roster, you're talking about, and we've had these discussions, well, what if you just spend the money on the pitching? What if you just, you bring someone in to play right field that's like league average and you lock up defense? What if you just stack every single game with pitching? And what we're seeing offensively is that when you get in these small samples, it's that like really that boom type potential that the Cubs may need to develop internally to match what we've seen so far.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's fine if they let Tucker go. That solves most of the problems, right? Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Because I was seeing some debate on this on social yesterday. Like,
Cubs are contenders or not?
Well, like they were, like, by default a World Series contender. You can't say that a team that's in the last 5 like isn't. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to look at you and tell you. I mean, they didn't even beat the Brewers, right? Like, I don't think they were getting by LA. And then if they did, I guess by that point, maybe something was going on.
Well, they were a different team in October that they were in June due to injuries and underwhelming performances after injuries.
And so I think, one thing we've learned too, watching the Dodgers, I think in particular these last couple of years, looking at the Blue Jays this year, like, so much of it is timing. And the Dodgers have the ability to kind of buy that for themselves. They're able to navigate the season and wait for Glasnow to come back and wait for Blake Snell to come back. And they have the luxury of, Roki Sasaki struggling and saying, you know what, hey, he's going to throw 100 miles an hour as our closer now, I guess, because he was struggling as a starter in, his first year. And so they have more of that luxury, but it's so much about timing, right? Like, they made the trade last year for Jack Flaherty, and Jack Flaherty's pitching huge games for them. Like, Yamamoto in his first year, like, the way he pitched in that World Series was not necessarily the way he pitched the entirety of that season.
Oh, he wasn't throwing complete game shutouts every game?
But he was stellar in last year's World Series and this World Series.
Yeah.
And, for them this year, the timing is these guys get healthy. They have the opportunity to utilize those guys. And, I think the Blue Jays as well, like, you're seeing some of it just like the timing, guys getting healthy. Some of it is bad timing, right? Springer getting hurt, etc. Yeah. And I think when you look back at this Cubs season, like, that's part of it. Like, when you got to that point where you were with Matthew Boyd, with Shota, maybe Cade Horton, he's coming back for the NLCS, but what does that look like? Like, it just wasn't there. So the question becomes,
can you control for that? Can you
Yes.
actually
The
build a
question
roster to
becomes,
fill
how
for
do
that?
you build
Oh,
a roster that is more not only able to get through 162 games and compete with the Brewers and win the National League Central, but then take things to that next level and survive the gauntlet that is October and what you need in October. And that's the area where I think like 2025, like it really probably wasn't going to get there. Now, of course, is there a scenario where if they keep playing, like does Kyle Tucker show up a bit more as that star? Does, whether that was a health thing or what? And can you get those performances to kind of carry you through, like we saw from Michael Busch in the earlier rounds? Potentially. Obviously, we'll never know that. But I think as we kind of look at 2026, the exercise is, okay, you're probably gonna lose Tucker. You're gonna have to replace that production somehow. And you're going to go into the year. Now, we don't necessarily know like when Justin Steele is going to take the mound. But your depth at starting pitching is pretty good in terms of like the potential that exists there. But some of these same questions persist about like, okay, you feel good about it if they're all healthy and they're all ready to go and everything's clicking, but there's a pretty big but to that for a lot of these guys, as we've discussed. So it's tricky, Brendan. It is tricky.
well, that's where Jed talked about the shape of the season and how there's maybe not a meaningful signal in formulating a roster that fits an even shape. The shape for the Cubs was lopsided in the first half in overproduction, and then lopsided in the second half in underproduction and injuries. And the question is, well, if there weren't injuries, could they have done what we're seeing the Blue Jays do? The pushback I will give to some of the uh, thinking that it is to some degree, and it all is, but random, is how the Jays went out and got their pitching and their pitching depth. It was Bieber, right? Could the Cubs have done the same thing? We don't know, right? There's nuance there. There's trade discussions. We know their mid-tier farm is not maybe up to par right now, but they went out and they got a depth starting pitcher that's making significant starting pitching performances in the World Series. You look at Savage for the Cubs. That was Cade Horton,
Yeah.
and the injury sapped him, right? Then the question is, well, did the Cubs build in enough depth, starting pitching wise or just pitching wise at the deadline to withstand the questions you and I are talking about and have been talking about? We had talked at the trade deadline. Well, what if Boyd fizzles? He hasn't done this before. What if, and you know where I'm going with this, what if Shota just can't last because of the injuries in his second full year, the uncertainties? And I feel as if when we look at the rosters for the Dodgers and Blue Jays, it's close. It's close in terms of how they fit the Cubs mold, but they clearly built more depth and they timed it up, and there's some fortune there, but you can't gloss over that, hey, you have Bieber making meaningful starts and you really developed your booming ace and may have protected him to get to this point. You do have to learn a little bit, and it's those fringe decisions that ultimately are making a deciding factor for the Blue Jays.
Sure. And we'll hit our first ad break here. I do want to acknowledge too, while it's easy to look at like some of the things that these teams did and, it's working. So it's easy to look at like the Blue Jays and say, well, this is working. Like just do this. Like there's also, of course, like some of it is just that October, not randomness, but everything is such a small sample. Everything is single games or single series. And there's always going to be that stuff. I mean, you look at the way that this series has played out with absolute firepower from the Dodgers at times, right? Shohei completely out of his mind in some of these games. Freddie Freeman hitting a walk-off home run.
Kike Hernandez.
Yeah,
Every
Kike
October.
Hernandez, who is like a playoff. I mean, it's like there's like magics. It's
Spring
like a
training
spell that
is
happens in
from
October.
April to September for Kike.
But there's also, again, like sometimes you get those unlikely, not necessarily unlikely heroes, but just guys that are stepping up and hitting lead off home runs to start these games despite minimal, career appearances. And then there's games where, Mookie Betts is popping out to second or short, like in every single at bat. It takes 18 innings for the Dodgers to win a 1-run game, a low scoring game in their own building. Like, there's some of it that, of course, you kind of just have to throw your hands up and go, well, hey,
Of
like,
course.
there's always going to be baseball that just takes over, no matter how good these plans looked or, how it all looks on paper. So it is all to say there is stuff to draw from this World Series and these teams. But of course, put two teams in a 7-game series and ask them
They're
to play
marginal.
baseball, stuff is going to happen.
They're marginal.
Yeah,
That's why
not you nor Jed, Carter,
No.
anyone can really, truly, like, be ready to predict those impacts. So
doesn't mean you can try to limit some of the error and correct some of the decisions you did make, right? But these are really like fringe marginal decisions that we're talking about in reality.
Yeah. So let's hit our first ad break here. We'll keep talking World Series and looking ahead to the 2026 Chicago Cubs.
Hey, Cubs fans, Toyota has 25 vehicles with available all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive. The RAV4 has legendary versatility. The Grand Highlander's adult size third row is for real, and the Tacoma's wild side comes standard. From job sites to campsites and game nights, there's an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive Toyota to get you there in style. Find yours at Toyota.com or visit your Chicagoland Toyota dealer today. Toyota Let's Go places and become a CHGO diehard and upgrade your fandom today. Get access to our exclusive written content, a free t-shirt, plenty of discounts on future merch and events, plus access to our CHGO Discord lounge where we all hang out and talk Chicago sports and so much more. So go to allchgo.com for the latest information on how you can join the thousands of CHGO diehards in our community. We cannot wait to connect with you on an ever greater level. Fall's here. Crisp air, football, maybe your bonfire or two, but if you're like most guys, you're still putting in hard work, and yeah, that means sweat. Don't let body odor silence on you. Let's be honest, regular deodorant just does not cut it, especially after a long day or watching those long Bears games on Sundays. But there's a real game changer, Mando Deodorant Plus Sweat Control. This isn't just another cover-up. Mando is one stick, 2 jobs, powerful odor and sweat control. Mando starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. Plus, as a special offer for listeners, new customers get 20% off site-wide with exclusive code CHGO at shopmando.com. Again, for 20% off site-wide plus free shipping. SHOPMANDO.com. Please support our show and tell them we sent you.
All right, Brendan, back with you here. So yeah, I think as we watch this World Series, I don't think anything has changed.
Well, it's a difficult conversation because, like, you and I both recognize that once you get into a playoff series, like, there is, it's up for grabs at times. But you can't ignore the firepower those teams have and the discussions we've had over the past couple of years. The discussions about the starting pitching performances and the depth and potential injury and fatigue looming, right? As well as just like Shohei hitting bombs, Freddie Freeman hitting walk-off bombs, George Springer hitting bombs, Vladdy hitting bombs. Like, you can't ignore that those are driving those wins, even though you can still rationalize that, like, the Cubs were really a contender themselves, just for a different reason than what we're seeing those teams accomplish.
Yeah. I know you had a graph for us tonight.
You want to see my graph?
Well, yeah, let's, we're talking about the offense. And I think, look, like, there's the usual caveat here now in some of these games, the Blue Jays kind of proving at least a little bit otherwise, but run scoring is at a, it's a low scoring environment in the playoffs. You're often facing the best pitchers, the best relievers, et cetera, et cetera. But we do see, as you said, so much driven by the home run ball. Like, the ability to slug, the ability to get that big hit is a huge driver of this. And ultimately, that's going to be the exercise going in, right? You're going to have to face good pitching. Like, you might get lucky and land an opponent that is doing bullpen games or guys are hurt, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, you're going to have to beat really good pitching. You're going to have to hit high velocity relievers. You're going to have to hit relievers with some of the best stuff in the league. And you're going to have to be able to execute in those situations, or you're going to go down similarly to how the Cubs did against the Brewers. And it's not some crazy thing, as we've said before, like to lose a decisive game in Milwaukee 3-1 to one of the better run prevention teams in baseball. There's nothing like shocking about that, but year in, year out, like that's what you're going to have to solve for. You're going to, if you win the World Series, you're going to face a team like that almost assuredly at some point in the run. Maybe you face some teams that are, bigger offensive juggernauts, or their pitching is just okay. They're going to try to outslug you at some point in the 3 or 4 teams that you end up playing. Very likely that one of them is going to try to beat you by preventing you from scoring any runs.
I'll show the graph. We'll talk about it. I do think when we look at the overall average numbers, you can't gloss over how extreme the first half from the Cubs were and the second half in opposite directions. Crow-Armstrong's on pace for 50 home runs. Then in the second half, he's hitting 2 or 3 home runs, right? But if you look at how the Blue Jays and Dodgers have produced their runs this year, is from a very wide range of outcomes in both bad and good directions. So for instance, if you look up top here, this is the Blue Jays, they had significantly underperforming bats. Anthony Santander was awful this year. Miles Straw, Andres Jimenez, Ernie Clement, right? These are guys that are not overpowering your bats, but they got at least 200 plate appearances. You go down to the Cubs at the very bottom, they don't have those underperformers with at least 200 plate appearances. Similarly, you have the Dodgers. Conforto did not perform well. Tommy Edman did not perform well. Kike Hernandez did not perform well. The Cubs didn't have those bad outcomes, but also they didn't really have the top tier outcomes either that the Blue Jays had. George Springer, plus 400 weighted on base average, all the way to the right. For, of course, the Dodgers, Shohei Ohtani, all the way to the right. What the Cubs had is something in the middle of those two teams. Not bad, not extremely bad, not extremely good, but the majority of the team, they were good. This is the average, though, right? So you're looking at a Cubs team entering October where that Pete Crow-Armstrong above average offense was not above average in the second half. Seiya Suzuki got out of that funk, but for 6 weeks it wasn't there. Kyle Tucker's power was sapped. So it was very different, but it is reflected in the overall numbers. And when you're designing a team, right, if you design an offense like the Cubs produced this year with that low ceiling, but that also the high floor, you're probably going to win games. But I do think you have to ask the question, okay, well, what is the likelihood you can't shape it in the playoffs? Do you want to shape it with a lot of guys who have more variability? But when you're super high, you're clicking and you're slugging like crazy. And for the Cubs, maybe you do want to limit some of the nonsense, right? But maybe you want to take a little bit more risk. Maybe you want to try to elevate that to, get those top 400 weight on base average guys in some fashion.
So, okay. So Edward in our chat asks, how do you even it out, like the Blue Jays and the Dodgers in that chat?
They try to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing. This is not critiquing the Cubs front office in that respect. These are marginal decisions that have had an impact. You can't knock the Cubs for trading for Kyle Tucker. He was the best bat available on the market, and they got him. It just did not work out. Then they had success with Michael Busch. And then Seiya Suzuki did come out of that funk, right? But to expect that for next year, though, at the same time, are you going to go into next year with Seiya Suzuki and a 340 weight on base average? Are you really going to be confident that Pete Crow-Armstrong can be better than the 324 weight on base average, right? If you subtract Tucker from that bunch, you're looking at above average league offensive bats, but nowhere near that top 10th percentile guy. So I think that's
Yeah.
kind of the nuance we're talking about. And either you internally develop it or you have to go out and make some trades or sign
Yeah.
some guys.
I think unfortunately, I don't think I would sit here and say that, like, if Tucker doesn't get hurt, or which time, and it sort of sets him out of whack, like that, we're sitting here, covering a World Series game 6 tomorrow. But that was the plan. And like, you go back, and that's why I felt like so
It
much of
would
the
have extended out that graph to the
Yes,
right.
and that's why I feel so much like, some of the discourse about, being done with him, or he's not worth the money. Like, I get the frustration, right? Like, the second half and the playoffs, like, he walked a ton, but um it doesn't carry that same weight. Like, again, sticking to the World Series, like, he wasn't doing what Vlad Jr. is doing, and like providing that like absolute lift that you need that like slugger to provide.
To
But
stay
he
stay
was,
on that point though for 1 second with Vlad
yeah,
Jr. Okay, so that's important because if you look at his numbers this year, guess who was better? It was Bush. So first say, oh well, they had Bush, and to your point again, Bush did perform, but you know what Vladdy's done in years past? He's had close to those numbers we saw from Shohei. He's had near 400 wOBAs. That's baked into the projection.
yeah.
When you look at Bush, it's not going to be baked in because he hasn't done it yet. So you do have to account for that uncertainty going forward.
Yeah, and so it's all just to say with Tucker, like, he was supposed to. Like, they did
Yeah.
try to solve for this. Now, would that have been enough? That's still not going to answer, some of the other inconsistencies we saw with the offense. Maybe that ebbs and flows from series to series. It's also not going to fix, your starting pitching kind of just running out of gas, and guys getting hurt, etc. But when we like rewind, like when they made the trade, like, so many people were like, oh, they paid too high a price, they gave up too much, it's only 1 year, et cetera, et cetera. But like, that was the point. The point was, you have good players, but you need the guy that can push it to that other level. And we saw that from Tucker in the first few months. It's a bummer that it didn't finish that way. And I don't think that there's anything that I would take from that even now. Like, they tried to solve for that. It may not have been enough still, like I said, but they did try to bring in that player, and they had him. He was doing it. Like, this was a top, what, 5 player for the first 3
Right.
months of the season?
And to the Cubs' credit, again, if you look at just the underperformers for Toronto and the Dodgers, they had several underperforming bats. Santander, we talked about the Cubs targeting him. He was awful this year. You talk about Tommy Edman, we were talking about him too. Michael Conforto even came up in the past couple of years. It's like, oh, that's a sneaky pick by the Dodgers. He was awful this year. The Cubs didn't have those awful everyday bats. And so to the front office's credit, like, they did a good job identifying the consistent everyday hitters and developing P. Crow-Armstrong, continuing the development of Michael Bush, getting Shaw past that early first 3-month funk. Now there's nuance on Seiya and all that, but the Cubs did have success there, and had Tucker stayed healthy, right? You do start to dream. So there is trending in the right direction, but you can see baseball, it's flimsy, man. That's how close this stuff really is.
Yeah, and so I think preemptively, the concern with not replacing Tucker is that you lose a guy that has demonstrated that ceiling
Yeah.
repeatedly, right? Again, I get it. I like, everyone was frustrated with how this played out, but I don't, going back to like a Theo process versus results, like, the process was good. Like, he got hurt a couple times. It derailed things. I don't know what to say about that, or what we're supposed to take from it. But the process was good. If you lose that, you lose the guy that we know at the MLB level is proven he has that ceiling and can perform at that level. And then you are so heavily reliant on some of these other guys
Correct. And it
figuring
changes how
out,
you build
yeah,
the rest of the roster, because then you have to
yeah.
spread out money other ways and you limit some of the risk profile that way as well. So it has enormous consequences. That's why every time I start thinking about Tucker and this Cubs offense, here's the two things before I do the ad break here. The two things that really keep me up at night with this Cubs roster in their picture is number one, how the trade deadline went down and how it was disappointing that their mid-tier farm did not produce this year. And so that may have limited the trades. That keeps me up at night. Number two is replacing Tucker's production. Those are the two things, because on paper, you're not going to get the high ceiling guys I just showed. Where are you going to get the 400 weighted on base average guys that you just saw? Where's the Vladdy potential? Vladdy didn't hit he didn't hit 400, but he was at 370-ish this year, right? Can Bush get to 400? Maybe. I hope he does. But what's the likelihood? Maybe a 10% chance, right? Like, that's what keeps me up at night. Okay. Let me hit the second ad break here. Come back around. I feel like we're being too negative. Are we being too negative? I don't think so.
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Okay. Second ad break here. New vehicles are in store at Ray Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, and this is your chance to score a great deal at the Drive Into Fall event. Head to Ray CDJR and Route 12 today to choose from their huge inventory of new Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram vehicles. Right now, get 0% financing for 72 months available on new models. Plus, shop over 125 vehicles priced under $20,000. With their friendly team of brand experts, the team at Ray CDJR is here to help you during each step of your car shopping journey. With Ray's Price Promise, you can shop confidently with no add-ons or hidden fees ever. The price you see is the price you pay. It is that simple. Go check out our partner today to shop one of the Chicago area's largest inventories to find the right new vehicle for you. Don't miss out on the Drive Into Fall event for huge savings on new models. For more information, visit Ray CDJR today on Route 12 in Fox Lake or online at raycdjr.com. They've been serving the community since 1963. Man, I can't wait to watch Cubs games again, whether it's spring training in Arizona or a sunny day at Wrigley, a Friday 120 game. There's nothing like that first crack of the bat, right? But getting those tickets, that is not the fun part. Queues, logins, prices that suddenly jump at checkout. All I want to do is be in the stands, get a drink, and cheer on the Cubs. That's why I use Game Time. It gives the advantage back to fans. It's the fastest, easiest hack to grab amazing seats in just a few taps. I always pull up Game Time when I'm planning spring training trips, Chicago trips. It's how I get my Cubs tickets. The app shows me the exact view from my seat, and the price you see, that's the price you pay. No hidden fees, no last minute surprises, just great deals and great seats. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or NBA tickets or NFL or even NHL tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Tap, ticket, go. That's Game Time.
To your last point, I don't think this is a negative conversation.
No, I mean,
I
like
think
the challenge, just to articulate that better, is that they had a lot of success. It doesn't discount some of the frustrations, nor does it discount some of the valid concerns. And when you contrast what you're seeing in the World Series, like, I want to be clear, you can't draw too much information on how you reshape your roster based on a 7-game series. Doesn't mean you can't at least acknowledge what's going on and how that may fit the overall projection, right? So it's not negative. I don't want to come off as being negative, but I can easily understand how people would be watching. Like, well, these guys, what are they talking about? Like, they try to get Kyle Tucker. They try to match the high offensive output. It didn't work. These guys are idiots.
Well, I mean, they'd be right about that, but that's a separate issue. So, no, I think it's an exercise in, like, this was a good team. They had a lot go right. Like, they were one of the better teams in baseball for the entire season. And as we keep saying, one of the last several standing. But you're always asking that question, like, were you prepared to go further? And how do you go further? And so until this team is standing atop the National League Central and positioned for deep playoff runs, like, I think, you can look at a team like the Phillies, and that feels more like a situation where it's like, hey, we lost a 5-game series to the Dodgers. Like, they didn't lose that last game because they were poorly constructed as a roster. Their pitcher panicked in a bad situation, and it cost them a decisive game. Like, these, these things happen. They've happened to us, right? But I think with where the Cubs ended up, it's reasonable to ask, like, yeah, that kind of felt like maybe about as good as you could have asked them to do. Like, and asking them to have played 2 more 7-game series, like, I'm not super confident that that would have gone that well. Again, some of that was construction, some of that was just timing and injuries and things
I
like
mean, just to
that.
push
So,
back on you and I right now, if I'm gonna play devil's advocate, we did see Sia come out of it. We
sure.
saw Bush come out of it. Tucker did again. He did produce in the playoffs in the form of walks and base hits. Like he had a home run in
Yeah.
Game 4, right? Like
Look, I think if you want to
it's
play devil's
close.
advocate, right? Like, if Cade Horton is healthy, how different does that postseason play
If
out?
Shota looked normal, what if he was?
If he's eating those starts and you're able to rest those other guys
I mean,
and maneuver things differently.
have we even acknowledged how weird that Shota situation was? If you were to have told me a year ago that in a decision Game 5 elimination game, we're gonna pass over Shota
Yeah.
for Colin Ray, I I would have been floored. I don't even know what I would have thought. And that's have we even really acknowledged how weird that end of the season was?
No.
I mean,
No,
like,
I never would have anticipated getting there. And, again, like how much of it had to do with him coming back from the injury and, not really like finding that groove again. But at the same time, like you can like, devil's advocate basically to every point, because
push
I
back.
think enough people are going to say like, well, that happens. Like all teams are dealing with injuries. Like there's not really a way to truly be prepared for all of it. You have to just be prepared for some of it and hope that the timing is such that it allows you to survive.
You know what the front offices would say? They would
I don't
say,
know.
well, that's why we try to make the playoffs 8 of every 10 years, because
Yeah.
sometime you can't time it right. But if you try enough, if you get into the party enough, one of those
Yeah.
times, the time is going to
And
work.
look, like I do think like honestly both of these teams are somewhat of a representative of that. Like this isn't the best regular season we saw from the Dodgers in the last several years.
No,
It's not even close actually
no.
to some of their best regular season outputs. Now,
The
of course,
Cubs had a better Pythag record. They
yeah.
even won more games, didn't they?
The Blue Jays were the best team in the American League, but they faltered at the end. They had to win it on the last day. Like
I was thinking we're going to trade for Vladdy at the deadline.
yeah, I mean, so
Opening,
I do think there is that
you know?
element of like you just got to get in and try to build a roster that has as little potential variance as you can, load up on arms and see if you can get there. But I think as we center this on the 2026 Cubs, like to me there's way too casual a discussion about just passing on Tucker and losing that and the expectations. Like there's a ton at this moment being expected from a lot of young, like raw kind of guys. Like without significant moves, you're expecting a lot from a guy like Matt Shaw, even from a guy like PCA to kind of like center himself between his two extremes. Michael Bush to continue this despite a strong sample now that he's able to do this at a very high level at the major league level. We've got people putting, Ballesteros and Casey, just throwing them into this. And it's not to say that they can't succeed, but it's an awful lot of relying on just in some respects, like unproven things. And you're
Mhm.
asking a lot, you know, like some of the performance that even in the projections you see from a guy like Ballesteros, like that's asking a lot for a guy who would be getting a role at the MLB level for the first time in his career, like on a regular in the rotation kind of basis.
Yeah, I understand the lure of it. I understand folks look at Ballesteros, they see a guy who's going to make a lot of contact, who seems hitterish. His swing looks good. I understand the Owen Casey talk. He's someone that kind of looks like Tucker in terms of stature, big guy, athletic guy, a lot of power. It's different though because the front office is going to account for both of those bad and good projection profiles. That decides how you spend money. And when Jed Hoyer's talking about consolidating war, dial in on those words, because that means, okay, well, we can plant this flag here in right field, put in 5 wins, which is what they did, and we can go out and we can spend more money. Of course, this is obvious, right? On volume of different positions or volume of pitchers. You don't have that luxury when you don't consolidate that war. You have to account for Bias Estero's bad outcome. You have to account for Owen Casey's bad outcome. And currently, the way you do that now on this positional roster is not from within, it's from external trades or signings that cost money or further trade prospect capital, if you will. It is a concern of mine, and I think it should be a genuine concern for most fans. It's going to be a very big challenge trying to replace that production.
Yeah, but again, I do feel like this organization's in a good spot. I think one thing that you learn from watching the World Series is like, I think especially that 18 inning game, like, of course, Schneider managed that weirdly, I think. And, taking out half your lineup for a pinch runner at some point is certainly a decision to make, right? But I do think it shows you, like, sometimes even teams that are a win away from a World Series and, by tomorrow, right, maybe have won a World Series, like, parts of their roster don't look great. Like, they end up in situations very quickly where you're looking at it going, what is this? Like,
Well,
what is this lineup? What am I looking at?
I texted you and you said, like, literally I was stupid for doing it, but like
I
to
was
some
probably
degree,
correct. Yeah.
you were probably correct about that one. But I'm like, I was watching the Blue Jays like back into their lineup, and I'm like seeing, these guys with like 300 wobas, and I'm thinking to myself, aren't the Cubs better than this? And that's what prompted like making those distribution graphs. I'm thinking to myself, how the hell does this look so much better than the Cubs when the names I'm seeing, Ernie Clement, I'm seeing three guys on their roster have the lowest 10th percentile bat speeds. I'm like, how the hell did this team make it? It's like, oh yeah, well, you had George Springer had a 400 WOBA. You had Vladdy hitting 500 in the playoffs because he has that unique contact unicorn power profile. Oh yeah, that's why, and that's what the Cubs don't have.
Yeah, and so I think in that respect, it can happen, right? You can plug and play last year a Cub for each of the guys that are like showing up and doing this for the Blue Jays. You can't, nothing is a good comp for Ohtani, obviously, but like
Rizzo,
you can see
Carlos Zambrano,
well, John Lester, dual threat.
John Lester. I think John Lester has a better swing.
Okay. I mean, even I don't even know if I would go that far, but
looks good, man.
Like you can see Kyle Tucker performing that way in the playoffs, like Vlad, and like hitting these huge home runs and like really leading with his slug. You can see, as you said, Cade Horton taking the role of the rookie that's, blowing people away. And like people are like, who's this guy? Where did this come from? Did anybody project this? That type of thing. Like you can see it. They had those players. Some of it really is, unfortunately, just a matter of timing. If the playoffs had started in the middle of Cade's second half run and you're able to get April Kyle Tucker and April Carson Kelly, like you can see these things. And that's not a way of like saying, screw it, just like throw whatever out there. But it's just an illustration of like, also don't get it twisted. Like, I don't think this team was far off, but given the variance and of course some of these predictable or unpredictable things happening ahead of the playoffs, they just didn't have enough to cover it, right? If Kyle Tucker's not performing at that, I'm the star, I'm hitting a homer in every other game type thing, like they just didn't have enough to cover those things. Cade Horton's not there. So you're not getting this like surprising rookie performance. You're not getting the, big veteran showing up in the World Series type performance because your pitchers are just out of gas. Got it a little bit, I guess, from Matthew Boyd at times back at
Were they
Wrigley.
ever built though for that? I mean, that's the question that comes to my mind when I hear you talk about
I
out
mean,
of gas.
I think you could say they were built for it if everything went perfectly.
And isn't that the one criticism where I'm
Yeah.
walking a tightrope, and I understand that, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of good that happened, but isn't that the main criticism that we talked about from day one? Is do we have enough gas to withlast an October run? And you can say undeniably, right now, the answer was no. And even if you had a healthy Cade Horton, that was never the certainty. Even if you had Justin Steele healthy, he had not gone through September without even a little bit of a minor tweak, right? So were they ever built to last? I don't know if they were. And I'd wonder if it's possible without overblowing your budget to do that with this roster. You know?
I know we talk about this a lot, and it's easier said than done, but this also does go back to like projections or otherwise, just needing to build a roster. Nothing is going to be like foolproof, but building a roster that just you got to flex your muscle a little bit at this point. Like going into this offseason, I think where it leads me and talking about the 2026 Cubs, you have to flex your muscle a little bit. Right now, even spending more money, you're not able to distance yourself from the Brewers, right? Call it their player development, their like scouting, their
Right.
devil magic, whatever you want to attribute these things to. Like, you're not distanced from the Brewers. You didn't win the division and they knocked you out of the playoffs. So you have a good core. You had a lot of young guys contribute and are going to be able to do that for you on cost controlled contracts, things like that. You have to kind of like be aggressive and say, you know what, we got caught in a situation where some stuff that was predictable, some stuff that of course wasn't, happened, right? Veteran pitchers, guys that were coming off, a previous year of injury or didn't have a track record of making 30 plus starts and being healthy going deep into the playoffs. This caught up with us, right? And I think going into 2026, like, this is where it's like, you're in this market, you make this money, you have this revenue, you got to flex it a little bit. And you have to build a roster that's a little more aggressive
Yeah.
at saying, instead of like, yeah, this is enough, like we have what we need. No. Keep
I
pushing. Like,
I
when you
think
feel that way, keep going and don't stop until it feels like too much. And I know they're not going, we do this exercise all the time. They're not going to act like the Dodgers. They're not going to act like the Mets. They're not going to act like the Padres. They're not going to be reckless. They're not going to go $100 million over the luxury tax. So given that behavior, only so much is realistic, right? But
yeah.
that's what I think the potential takeaway is. Like, the opportunity is always going to present itself that your best case scenario just is not able to come to fruition
I
because of
bel
injuries, performance, fatigue, all these different things. And I don't think the Cubs had enough of a contingency for some of these things,
well, they
despite
didn't.
being really good and despite having a very successful year. And again, the only thing we're talking, like, not to make it like this isn't like a, fire jet or like anything crazy. It's not that type of discussion. It's just a discussion of like, they did a really good job, but it
Well,
ultimately wasn't enough.
I mean, the front office is not going to sit there in their in their conference rooms, whatever their Zoom calls, whatever they do. They're not going to sit there, cross their legs, and be like, you know what? It was all about timing. We're going to do the exact same thing. You want to talk about self-critical thinking? They're ripping themselves. I
Yeah.
guarantee you, they're ripping themselves. Jed may be thinking, "Damn it, the pitching market was hot at the deadline. They wanted way more than I could offer. Damn, that $10 million that we had set aside in that pillow for making a splash, the market didn't turn out like I wanted, but he built that there. How do you make sure that doesn't happen again? We saw this self-correction from 24 to 25 in the bullpen. The bullpen was volume in 25. Chris Flexen, you're eating 30 innings. You saw the trickle effect of that. We're bringing in 15 non-roster invitees. Boom, one of them hit. He's your closer, Brad Keller, in the wild card series, right? You saw volume. That was a self-correction. So the self-correction, maybe from Jed's point of view, might be what you're talking about. It might be, okay, we're going to go in this offseason and we're not going to have that $5 to $10 million pillow. We're going to spend a little bit more because we don't know what the market's going to be like given the precedents. And so I think, and you heard Jed talk about this at the deadline, that was something they did not properly, and that may not be the best phrase, but it was not what they anticipated at the deadline, the market being that hot.
Yeah. I think, summed up somewhat in the way that I think of the pitching going into this offseason. Like if you, again, not knowing exactly when Steele's going to be ready and when he's going to be at his best, but let's say, they figure out the option situation or whatever with Shota. So he's back. You have Matthew Boyd back, Tyone, Assad,
It
Tate
seems like a good
Horton,
base.
hopefully, ready. Well, and so, but that's how I would square this. Like you can look at that and say, yeah, that should be good enough. No, don't look at it that way, and that doesn't mean they have to go spend $80 million in a single offseason on pitching, like just for 1 year. But it just means like, don't look at it through the lens of like, yeah, like if that's all good and, Justin Steele comes back a couple months into the season, like that'll really give him a lift. Like that's basically like acquiring a pitcher at the deadline,
Todd
like
Ricketts is like, that's right.
Don't look at it that way. When you look at the guys available, even someone like Dylan Cease, for example, like bring him in.
Boy,
throw him in there, like load up on it. And if you feel like, yeah, this could be good enough, this is a solid group, keep going, keep adding more with whatever is within reason for the budget that they're given. Now, again, till we're red in the face, we can complain about that, but it's not going to do anything.
Well, right now, if you go to just MLB COTS or wherever you're going to get the different payroll projections, they're around 50-ish or so million away, maybe 70 million away, realistically, probably around 50, 60 of hitting that first year of the tax next season. So if Tom Ricketts is genuine about being around that first year, the thinking is, okay, you have $50 million. Again, this is a huge range of error at this point in the offseason, but $50 million to spend on shoring up your roster. So you talked about, well, you have Tyone, Assad, Boyd, Steele, Horton. That's a strong base. Well, maybe you want to keep amplifying that, right? But you can make the argument, well, the base is strong, right? So maybe we're going to take more flyers on the pitching and we're going to spend that money on the offense. But then the argument is, well, the offense was strong. You had Shaw have a great second half. You were returning Michael Busch, who's performing well. He's progressing. So then the question is, well, you have two strong bases. And then you start thinking, well, am I being dumb? Should I be more optimistic? Isn't this a good situation? I think the answer would be, yeah. So then I'm like slapping myself in the face. Like, calm down.
It's no, 100%. And I hope it was clear through this conversation. You never know, but like the general tenor of the conversation was meant to be, this organization is in a pretty good place. Like they've got a lot of good things,
like a good thing given what
going on. And it's just a question of like, how do you push it to that next level? Cause like, look, if they ran a similar, maybe not like exact roster back, cause there's obviously changes, but like a similar feeling group in terms of the projections and just like how their, defense and pitching plays together and their strategy, those things, like it's not a strategy that a lot of teams and a place that this organization is in, that a lot of organizations in this sport wouldn't trade places.
Yeah.
Right. If you felt like you could put a group out, and we talk about this, it's of course with the new wild card rules in the series, like if you could feel like you have a legitimate group that should be making the playoffs, should be sniffing that area, you're better than a lot of these other teams in the National League, you should be getting there. Like if you get, five cracks at the piñata,
I think
maybe you break it open one of those years, right? It's not
talking like an executive.
The question though, right, is that good enough for the Cubs organization? And does that distance you enough from where Milwaukee is right now, which despite sometimes it not making a lot of sense to us on paper, there they are. They're doing this exact thing every year. They're never pushing all their chips in. They never look like the big dog in the field, but they get in there and, of course they'll never win a title. They've never
Right.
won one in their history.
That
And,
is very
that's
true.
just how things go in
That's how it
Wisconsin. But
goes.
like they're, again, most organizations are going to trade places with the Brewers. And they're going to be like, yeah, look, if we keep getting a crack at it, like we'll take it. We'll sell some playoff tickets and hopefully we sneak a pennant in there. Hopefully we sneak a World Series in there. Like, and that's
Just
fine.
one.
Like nobody is ever going to be perfect. Right. But I think for the Cubs, so long since having that playoff appearance and success that they did in 2025, it's about taking it to that next level. And how do you build on this? And how do you try to adjust for some of the things that derailed your 2025 season ultimately in the end?
I mean, it's timing up the next few years as well. When windows close suddenly, you don't know when they're going to close.
Yeah.
So you may have an expectation, hey, Dansby Swanson is going to be here for the next 4 years. You really don't know how all of a sudden age hits you. So there's a delicate balance where in past years, you saw how the front office with Jed, and at that time, of course, Theo was running the show, but you saw they held on to their guys too long. Those are not my words. That's the word straight out of their mouths. They held on to those guys too long, and their win window
Well, I mean,
closed
if
too
they
short.
just give Almora a couple more
Just a
shots, I
couple more
really think he's
shots.
got it.
I
Yeah.
know. Such a shame, right? But that's where I'm looking at even this offseason. I'm asking myself the question is, okay, we know what they're trying to do. You want to get in 4 out of 5 years, 8 out of every 10 years. But is there a little bit of a sacrifice in that thinking from Jed? Like, are we going to think about that? Because he's been around for a while. We've seen him self-reflect and self-correct, right? And he's thinking about win windows, and he's thinking about the aging
Yeah.
of his roster, Hap, Seiya, etc. Like, I do
Yeah.
wonder what
Well,
we're going
and
to see.
this, as we head into this offseason, I mean, certainly the Kyle Tucker decision, the Cubs being involved or not involved, and how they choose to operate in the aftermath is certainly, I think, the predominant storyline for this group. The other one, though, is, there is potential of a lockout or at least a CBA problem in a year. And the Cubs have a lot of money coming off the books. They have a lot of guys only with one more year on their contract. They have a lot of guys who already, from 2025 aren't going to be
Right.
coming back.
And maybe just holding out for that. No pun intended.
So it's all to say, I don't know how Tom and Jed are going to approach those things. And they may really significantly inform those things. Again, you pair that with like, do you look at guys like PCA and Matt Shaw and say like, hey, we got like a 5-year window here now, like
Right.
where, there'll be an arbitration, whatever, but we should have them here, Michael Busch, somewhat on a similar timeline. Then you look like, okay, but in that span, Dansby's going to get older. He's
Right.
not going to be locking down shortstop for this entire time.
No, let's not get
Nico,
crazy.
Hap, some of these guys, their contracts are expiring. Like, different potential, kind of lanes to look at. Like, I think there's an argument to look at 2026, especially ahead of the lockout, as like, go for it. Like, try to win with this group, capitalize on where PCA and Michael Busch and these guys are at. And then, Tom is, excuse me, probably looking at this going like, I don't want money on the books if there's going to be a
Listen,
lockout.
if
Like,
you can
forget that.
go out and get like 1 year blowed out of the water contract, sign me
Yeah.
up for it. I just don't think the market's
Everybody
going
on
to
a
do that.
Carlos Correa deal. Bring
I
everybody
don't
in.
cease.
Yeah.
3 year,
Pete
40 million
Alonso,
AAV.
Cody Bellinger,
Bring
Kyle
them all
Tucker. How
over.
many of you are willing to work for a year, and then we'll figure it out from there? Yeah, and see
Maybe
what you
that's
can get away
marketing
with.
efficiency. All
So
right.
yeah, all right, we'll wrap it up here. Again, the World Series will be over by the next time we talk to you guys. So the off season will begin. Arbitration, non-tenders, all these things, and then free agency and trades can start to happen. We can get things going. Again, Luke, Joey, Justin, throughout the week, they'll have you covered. They're doing great work on the daily show from Monday to Thursday afternoon. We will be back with you, of course, on Thursday night. and a lot of offseason to go. I would expect a lot of offseason. You know, when we get into those episodes, the specific rumors will fly. And when guys are connected to the Cubs, we'll break them down in detail, what you can expect if they do sign, the ramifications, things like that. So stick with CHGO Cubs throughout the offseason, and we will have you covered. We appreciate you tuning in and your support as always. We'll talk to you next week. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.